Most people don't fail because they lack talent, opportunity, or intelligence. They fail because one day they quietly accepted a version of themselves that was convenient instead of capable. They learned how to survive, but they forgot how to grow. And over time, comfort slowly replaced courage. There comes a moment in every life when you realize something uncomfortable. The problem isn't the world, the timing, or the people around you. The problem is that you have outgrown the person you've been choosing to be. You can feel it in your frustration, in your restlessness, in that quiet voice that says, Arv, there's more in me than this. That voice is not complaining, it's calling. Rebuilding yourself doesn't begin when everything falls apart. It begins when you refuse to stay the same. It begins when you understand that your past does not need permission to release you, but your future does need commitment to receive you. You don't rebuild because you are broken. You rebuild because growth demands renovation. Today is not about motivation. It's about decision. A decision to examine your habits, your thinking, your standards, and your discipline. Because the most important project you will ever work on is not your job, your business, or your circumstances. It is the person you wake up as every single day. Personal responsibility is the moment a person stops waiting for life to change and starts deciding to change themselves. It is the acceptance that where you are right now, financially, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, is largely the result of choices you have made, actions you have taken, and habits you have practiced over time. This idea is uncomfortable for many people because it removes excuses, but it is also the most empowering truth you can ever accept. The moment you take responsibility, you reclaim control. As long as blame exists, growth is impossible because blame hands your power to something outside of you. Most people want improvement without ownership. They want better results, but continue with the same thinking. They hope circumstances will shift, people will change, or luck will arrive. Personal responsibility rejects hope as a strategy and replaces it with intention. It says that regardless of the economy, upbringing, or setbacks, your response determines your direction. Two people can start from the same background and end in completely different places, not because life favored one, but because one chose responsibility while the other chose explanation. Taking responsibility does not mean denying hardship or pretending obstacles don't exist. It means acknowledging reality without becoming a victim of it. Responsibility asks a better question than, why did this happen to me? It asks, what can I do about it now? That shift in questioning immediately moves the mind from paralysis to progress. A person who owns their situation begins to search for solutions, skills, and strategies instead of sympathy. Personal responsibility also requires honesty. You must be willing to look at your habits and admit which ones are helping you and which ones are harming you. If your finances are struggling, responsibility asks you to examine spending habits, income skills, and financial education. If relationships are failing, responsibility looks at communication, patience, and emotional control. If health is declining, responsibility points toward daily routines, discipline, and choices. This level of honesty is rare because it removes comfort, but it is the birthplace of transformation. Change cannot occur while you are emotionally attached to excuses. Excuses feel good temporarily because they protect ego, but they quietly destroy potential. Responsibility does the opposite. It challenges ego when it builds character. When you accept responsibility, you no longer waste energy defending the past. That energy becomes available for building the future. You stop saying, I can't because, and start asking, how can I? That question alone opens doors most people never see. Responsibility also builds self-respect. When you keep promises to yourself, follow through on commitments, and take ownership of results, you begin to trust yourself. Confidence does not come from motivation or external praise. It comes from evidence. Each responsible action becomes proof that you are capable of change. Over time, this creates inner strength that is not dependent on approval or circumstance. Another powerful aspect of responsibility is that it shifts focus from control over outcomes to control over effort. You cannot control everything that happens, but you can control your preparation, attitude, consistency, and response. When you accept responsibility for effort, failure loses its power to discourage you. Failure becomes information instead of identity. You don't say, I failed. You say, that approach failed. Now I will adjust. This mindset keeps momentum alive even during difficulty. Personal responsibility also demands maturity. It requires the understanding that no one is coming to save you. Mentors can guide, books can teach, and opportunities can appear, but execution remains personal. Waiting to be rescued delays growth. The decision to rebuild yourself begins the moment you stop outsourcing your future to people's systems or circumstances. As responsibility deepens, standards rise. You begin to expect more from yourself, not because you are harsh, but because you are aware of your potential. You stop negotiating with laziness and start honoring discipline. You understand that every day you either reinforce the person you have been or invest in the person you are becoming. Responsibility makes this choice conscious instead of accidental. Ultimately, personal responsibility is the foundation of change because nothing else works without it. Knowledge without responsibility becomes information. Goals without responsibility become wishes. Dreams without responsibility become frustration. But when responsibility is present, even small actions begin to compound, habits begin to shift, and identity begins to evolve, because the power to rebuild has finally been placed where it always belonged, within you. Your philosophy is the quiet force operating beneath every decision you make. It is the collection of beliefs, attitudes, interpretations, and assumptions through which you view life. Most people underestimate its power because it is invisible, but nothing shapes results more than philosophy. You don't get paid for what you know, you get paid for how you think. Two individuals can have the same education, the same opportunities, and the same resources, yet produce dramatically different outcomes because their philosophies guide how they act on what they have. Philosophy determines how you interpret events. When difficulty arrives, one person sees punishment, another sees instruction. One says life is unfair, another says life is challenging. These interpretations are not harmless opinions. They become instructions to the nervous system. If your philosophy tells you that struggle means stop, you will quit early. If your philosophy tells you that struggle means grow, you will persist longer. Over time, persistence always outperforms talent. Most philosophies are inherited, not chosen. They come from parents, teachers, culture, and early experiences. A child hears phrases repeated enough times and accepts them as truth. Money is hard to earn. People can't be trusted. Success is for a few. Failure is shameful. These ideas sink below awareness and quietly govern behavior. People don't fail because they lack potential. They fail because they are operating from borrowed philosophies that limit action. Your philosophy dictates your standards. What you tolerate is what you accept as normal. If your philosophy says average is safe, you will avoid risk and ambition. If your philosophy says growth is necessary, you will stretch beyond comfort. Standards decide whether you read or scroll, save or spend, act or delay. Results are nothing more than standards expressed repeatedly over time. Philosophy also shapes your emotional reactions. Life does not respond to your emotions, but your emotions respond to your philosophy. If your philosophy frames criticism as an attack, you will become defensive. If it frames criticism as data, you will become curious. Emotional maturity is not the absence of emotion. It is the presence of a philosophy strong enough to guide emotion, instead of being ruled by it. Many people attempt to change their results without changing their philosophy. They chase tactics, shortcuts, and motivation, but ignore the internal framework producing their behavior. This creates frustration because old thinking keeps pulling them back to familiar patterns. Sustainable change only occurs when philosophy changes first. When beliefs shift, behavior follows naturally without force. A powerful philosophy is not built on optimism alone, but on responsibility and truth. It recognizes that life is difficult and still demands effort. It understands that fairness is not guaranteed, but progress is possible. This kind of philosophy produces resilience. It doesn't collapse under pressure because it expects pressure. It doesn't quit at the first setback because it anticipates resistance. Your philosophy also determines how you value time. Some philosophies treat time casually, others treat it as precious. If you believe time will always be available, procrastination feels harmless. If you believe time is non-renewable, urgency appears naturally. Discipline is not about willpower, it is about philosophy. People with a strong philosophy don't argue with themselves daily about what they should do. Their beliefs already decided. Philosophy influences identity. You act in alignment with who you believe you are. If your philosophy says, "This is just how I am," change feels unnatural. If it says, "I am capable of growth," change feels required. Identity-based philosophy is powerful because behavior becomes self-reinforcing. Each action confirms the belief, and the belief fuels the next action. Philosophy even shapes what you notice. You don't see the world as it is, you see it as you are. Opportunities often pass unnoticed because they don't align with existing beliefs. When philosophy expands, perception expands. What once looked impossible begins to look unfamiliar, then possible, then necessary. To rebuild yourself, philosophy must be examined deliberately. You must question inherited beliefs instead of obeying them. You must ask whether your current philosophy produces the life you want or the life you tolerate. This examination is uncomfortable because it exposes responsibility, but it also opens choice. Once you realize philosophy is adjustable, you stop being trapped by your past thinking. A refined philosophy does not guarantee immediate success, but it guarantees direction. It aligns effort with purpose and struggle with meaning. When philosophy improves, decisions improve. When decisions improve, habits improve. When habits improve, results follow not by luck but by design. Discipline is the quiet force that transforms intention into reality. It is not loud, dramatic, or emotional, yet it determines whether potential remains hidden or becomes visible. Everyone has goals, ideas, and desires, but the difference between those who progress and those who stagnate is discipline. Discipline is the bridge between who you are today and who you have the capacity to become, because it converts future vision into present action. Most people misunderstand discipline and associate it with punishment or restriction. In reality, discipline is not about denying yourself. It is about directing yourself. It is the ability to choose what you want most over what you want now. Every meaningful improvement requires this choice. The body prefers comfort, the mind prefers ease, and discipline provides the structure that prevents comfort from becoming a trap. Without discipline, talent becomes unreliable and motivation becomes temporary. Discipline creates consistency, and consistency is what reshapes identity. Occasional effort produces occasional results, but repeated effort rewires behavior. When you act with discipline, even when you don't feel like it, you begin to trust yourself. Self-trust is built when actions align with commitments. Each disciplined decision sends a signal to the mind that you are someone who follows through, and over time this belief becomes part of who you are. The absence of discipline is not caused by laziness, it is caused by undisciplined thinking. When the mind negotiates with discomfort, discipline collapses. Discipline requires pre-decision. When you decide in advance what standards you will live by, you remove the daily debate. You don't rely on emotion to guide action, you rely on principle. This is why disciplined people appear calm and focused. They are not constantly deciding what to do. They already decided who they are. Discipline is also the mechanism that turns small actions into long-term transformation. No single disciplined act changes a life, but the accumulation of them does. Reading daily may seem insignificant. Saving a small amount may seem slow. Practicing a skill may feel repetitive, but over time these actions compound. Discipline respects the power of time. It understands that progress is not dramatic, it is deliberate. Without discipline, goals remain theoretical. Discipline is what gives goals weight. It anchors ambition to routine. Anyone can set a goal, but only discipline turns that goal into a schedule, a habit, and a non-negotiable standard. Discipline does not wait for ideal conditions. It works within reality, not fantasy. It functions on ordinary days, not just inspired ones. Discipline also strengthens emotional control. Many people are controlled by moods, acting only when they feel confident, energized, or motivated. Discipline reverses this relationship. Action comes first, and emotion follows. When you act despite resistance, confidence grows. When you wait for confidence before acting, stagnation sets in. Discipline trains the nervous system to function under discomfort, which expands your capacity to handle pressure. Another critical role of discipline is protection. Discipline protects you from distractions, impulsive decisions, and short-term thinking. It creates boundaries around your time, energy, and focus. Without discipline, life pulls you in every direction. With discipline, you decide what deserves attention. This ability to say no is just as important as the ability to act. Progress requires subtraction as much as addition. Discipline does not remove struggle, it organizes it. Growth always involves discomfort, but discipline ensures that discomfort is productive rather than chaotic. Instead of suffering randomly, disciplined people choose meaningful difficulty. They choose effort that builds skill, strength, and character. This choice transforms struggle from something to avoid into something to respect. Discipline is especially powerful because it is available to everyone. It does not require talent, intelligence, or privilege. It requires decision and repetition. This makes discipline the great equalizer. Those with less natural ability but strong discipline often surpass those with more ability but weak structure. Over time, discipline outperforms motivation, enthusiasm, and even confidence. When discipline becomes part of your identity, progress stops feeling forced. It becomes normal. What once felt difficult becomes standard. You no longer ask whether you should act. You act because it is who you are. This is how discipline bridges the gap between potential and reality, not through intensity, but through consistency, not through emotion, but through commitment, not through sudden change, but through repeated choice made daily, regardless of mood, circumstance, or convenience. Failure is often misunderstood because it is emotionally charged and culturally stigmatized. Many people see failure as a verdict on their ability or worth. But in reality, failure is information. It is feedback that reveals what does not work, what needs adjustment, and where growth is required. When viewed correctly, failure becomes a teacher rather than a threat. The problem is not failure itself, but the meaning people attach to it. From an early age, people are conditioned to fear failure. Mistakes are punished, errors are mocked, and falling short is associated with shame. This conditioning creates avoidance. People stop trying not because they lack desire, but because they associate failure with personal inadequacy. This mindset turns failure into an ending rather than a signal. In truth, most progress is preceded by multiple failed attempts that refine skill, understanding, and resilience. Failure exposes gaps between expectation and reality. When something doesn't work, it reveals weaknesses in strategy, preparation, timing, or execution. Without failure, these gaps remain hidden. Success can be misleading because it does not demand analysis. Failure forces examination. It asks uncomfortable questions that comfort never raises. What did I overlook? Where did I assume instead of verify? What skill is missing? These questions sharpen judgment and prevent repetition of the same mistake. Failure also builds awareness of limitations, not to create discouragement, but to invite development. Limits are not permanent walls, they are indicators of where growth is needed. A person who avoids failure avoids discovering their true capacity. Each failure stretches perception of what is possible. The mind becomes less fragile when it realizes that failing does not cause collapse. This psychological toughness is essential for long-term achievement. Another important function of failure is humility. Failure strips away illusion. It reveals that effort without alignment is ineffective. It teaches respect for process. Many people want outcomes without mastery, results without repetition. Failure corrects this imbalance. It enforces patience and discipline. It teaches that progress has stages and shortcuts often delay rather than accelerate success. Failure also strengthens problem-solving ability. When things work, thinking remains shallow. When things fail, thinking deepens. The brain becomes engaged in analysis, pattern recognition, and adjustment. Over time, this builds adaptability. Adaptability is more valuable than perfection because conditions are always changing. Those who can learn from failure respond faster and more intelligently to new challenges. Emotionally, failure teaches regulation. Initial failure triggers frustration, disappointment, and self-doubt. When a person learns to stay present instead of reactive, emotional maturity increases. This ability to experience discomfort without quitting is what separates temporary participants from long-term builders. Emotional resilience is not built during ease. It is built during recovery. Failure also clarifies commitment. When something fails, you discover how much you truly want the outcome. Those who are casually interested withdraw. Those who are deeply committed adjust and continue. Failure becomes a filter that separates interest from intention. This clarity saves time and energy by revealing which pursuits deserve continued investment. Another overlooked aspect of failure is that it removes fear of trying. Once a person has failed and survived, the unknown loses its intimidation. The imagined consequences of failure are usually worse than the reality. Experiencing failure reduces anxiety around action. It makes risk manageable. Action becomes easier when fear is replaced by familiarity. Failure also provides direction. Success tells you where you are. Failure tells you where to go next. It narrows options and eliminates ineffective approaches. Each failure refines strategy. Over time, this refinement leads to precision. Mastery is not built on endless success, but on intelligent correction. Failure only becomes destructive when it is internalized as identity. Saying, "This didn't work," leads to growth. Saying, "I am not capable," leads to stagnation. The distinction is subtle but critical. When failure is separated from self-worth, learning remains possible. When it is merged with identity, progress stops. Those who understand failure as feedback approach life differently. They act sooner, adjust faster, and persist longer. They don't wait for perfect conditions because they trust their ability to learn. They treat setbacks as part of the process, not interruptions to it. This perspective transforms failure from an obstacle into a mechanism for refinement, adaptation, and advancement, allowing progress to continue without the weight of fear, shame, or self-judgment. Small, consistent improvements are often overlooked because they appear insignificant in the moment, yet they are the most reliable force behind lasting transformation. People are naturally drawn to dramatic change, believing that progress must be intense, fast, or revolutionary to matter. This belief causes many to wait for the perfect moment, the perfect plan, or a surge of motivation. In doing so, they ignore the quiet power of daily effort, which operates beneath awareness but shapes outcomes over time. Every result in life is the accumulation of repeated actions. No one suddenly becomes unhealthy, unskilled, or unsuccessful overnight, just as no one suddenly becomes excellent without a process. The body, the mind, and circumstances respond to what is practiced consistently. Small improvements work because they bypass resistance. A massive change demands immediate discomfort, which the mind instinctively avoids. A small improvement feels manageable, almost harmless, and therefore easier to repeat. Consistency matters more than intensity because intensity is difficult to sustain. A person may work extremely hard for a short period and see little change, then quit out of frustration. Another person may work modestly but consistently and experience steady progress. Time rewards repetition, not enthusiasm. When effort becomes routine, it stops requiring motivation. This is where transformation begins, not through heroic effort, but through ordinary discipline practiced daily. Small improvements also compound. Compounding is subtle at first, almost invisible, which is why many people abandon the process too early. Early results rarely reflect effort accurately. Progress lags behind behavior. Skills improve internally before they show externally. Knowledge accumulates before it becomes wisdom. Strength builds before it becomes visible. Those who understand this delay remain patient and persistent, while those who don't assume their efforts are wasted. Each small improvement reinforces identity. When you do something positive repeatedly, even in small amounts, you begin to see yourself differently. Identity shapes behavior more powerfully than goals. A person who sees themselves as someone who improves daily naturally seeks growth-oriented actions. This identity shift is gradual, but once established, it becomes self-sustaining. Behavior no longer feels forced because it aligns with self-image. Small improvements reduce overwhelm. Large goals can feel intimidating and paralyzing. Breaking them down into manageable actions creates clarity. Instead of asking how to change an entire life, the focus shifts to how to improve today. This narrows attention and increases follow-through. Progress becomes approachable rather than abstract. Momentum builds when action feels achievable. Consistency also creates trust with oneself. Each time you follow through on a small commitment, you strengthen self-belief. Confidence grows not from affirmations, but from evidence. When evidence accumulates, doubt weakens. Over time, this internal trust becomes a powerful stabilizer, especially during difficulty. You no longer question whether you can continue because you have already proven that you can. Small improvements are flexible. If circumstances change, effort can be adjusted without abandoning progress. This adaptability keeps momentum alive. Rigid systems break under pressure. Flexible systems endure. Daily improvement allows for imperfection without collapse. Missing a day does not destroy progress when consistency is the goal rather than perfection. Another advantage of small improvements is sustainability. Extreme approaches often lead to burnout. Sustainable change respects energy, time, and reality. It integrates growth into daily life rather than requiring constant sacrifice. This makes progress compatible with long-term living instead of temporary effort. Small improvements also sharpen awareness. When you focus on incremental growth, you become more attentive to habits, patterns, and feedback. You notice what works and what doesn't. This awareness allows for intelligent adjustment rather than blind repetition. Over time, this creates efficiency. You get better results with less wasted effort. The cumulative effect of small improvements is often underestimated because humans are poor at perceiving gradual change. Yet history, skill mastery, and personal transformation all follow this pattern. Those who succeed are rarely those who made the biggest moves, but those who made the smallest moves consistently for the longest time. When improvement becomes a daily standard, progress becomes inevitable. The question shifts from whether change will occur to how far it will go. This mindset removes pressure and replaces it with patience. Growth stops being a struggle and becomes a process. Over time, what once felt like effort becomes normal behavior, and what once felt impossible becomes a reflection of consistent, intentional choices repeated quietly, steadily, and persistently over days, months, and years. The idea that you must become more to achieve more is one of the most confronting truths about personal growth because it removes the illusion that external change alone will solve internal limitations. Many people want better results without becoming a better version of themselves. They want higher income, stronger relationships, greater confidence, and more freedom, yet they resist the personal development required to sustain those outcomes. Achievement is not something you chase, it is something that responds to who you are becoming. Life has a way of rewarding growth and exposing stagnation. The level of problems you face is directly connected to the level of person you are. As you grow, your problems change, not in number, but in nature. A person with limited skills struggles with survival problems. A person with expanded skills deals with leadership, responsibility, and influence. Growth does not eliminate challenge, it upgrades it. This is why wishing for an easier life is ineffective. The real solution is becoming stronger, wiser, and more capable. Becoming more begins internally. Skills, mindset, discipline, emotional control, and awareness must expand before external results can expand. If income increases without an increase in financial understanding, stress follows. If influence increases without character, reputation suffers. If responsibility increases without emotional maturity, pressure becomes overwhelming. Growth protects you from the weight of success by preparing you to carry it. Personal growth also determines capacity. Capacity is the ability to handle more opportunity, more pressure, more responsibility, and more complexity. Without growth, opportunity becomes threatening instead of exciting. Many people unconsciously sabotage chances because they feel unprepared to handle them. When you grow, capacity expands, and what once felt intimidating becomes manageable. Becoming more also changes how you see yourself. Self-image is a powerful regulator. You unconsciously act in ways that are consistent with who you believe you are. If your self-image is small, you will shrink opportunities. If it is expanding, you will step into challenges. Growth reshapes identity gradually through learning, effort, and experience. As identity evolves, behavior follows naturally. Growth requires intentional effort. You do not become more by accident. Reading, learning, practicing skills, reflecting, and applying lessons are all part of the process. This effort often feels uncomfortable because growth demands unfamiliar behavior. The mind prefers familiarity even when familiarity limits progress. Becoming more requires stepping beyond what feels natural until the new standard becomes normal. Becoming more also involves shedding outdated beliefs. Some beliefs once served a purpose but now restrict progress. Beliefs about what is possible, what you deserve, or what you are capable of must be questioned. Growth requires unlearning as much as learning. This process can feel unsettling because it disrupts certainty, but certainty without growth leads to stagnation. As you grow, your standards rise. You become less tolerant of behaviors that waste time, energy, and potential. This is not arrogance, it is awareness. You begin to recognize the cost of inconsistency, distraction, and procrastination. Growth makes trade-offs visible. You see clearly that every choice either builds the future or reinforces the past. Becoming more also strengthens decision-making. Growth improves judgment because it increases perspective. With greater understanding, you make fewer impulsive choices and more strategic ones. You become proactive instead of reactive. Decisions are no longer driven solely by emotion or convenience, but by long-term impact. Growth changes how you handle pressure. Pressure does not disappear as you achieve more, it increases. The difference is that growth equips you with emotional regulation, discipline, and perspective. What once caused stress becomes manageable. What once caused doubt becomes a challenge to solve. Growth does not make life lighter, it makes you stronger. The process of becoming more never ends because life keeps asking for more. New seasons demand new skills. New responsibilities demand new awareness. This continuous growth is not a burden but a privilege. It keeps life dynamic and meaningful. Stagnation feels safe at first, but it eventually becomes suffocating. Achievement is simply the outward expression of inward growth. When you become more patient, you build better relationships. When you become more skilled, you earn more value. When you become more disciplined, you create stability. When you become more aware, you avoid unnecessary mistakes. External success always follows internal development, never the other way around. Rebuilding yourself is not a single moment of inspiration. It is a lifelong commitment to growth. It is the decision to take responsibility instead of making excuses, to shape your philosophy instead of inheriting limits, to practice discipline even when it is uncomfortable, and to view failure not as defeat but as instruction. It is understanding that small, consistent improvements create extraordinary change, and that to achieve more in life, you must first become more as a person. The world does not change to accommodate your potential, it responds to your preparation. When you rebuild your thinking, your habits, your standards, and your character, your results have no choice but to evolve. You may not see dramatic change tomorrow, but if you stay consistent, you will look back one day and realize you are no longer the person who once struggled. You are the person who overcame. So step forward with intention. Choose growth over comfort. Choose discipline over delay. Choose responsibility over blame. Rebuild yourself patiently, deliberately, and unapologetically, because the future you are hoping for is waiting for the version of you that is willing to rise and meet it. Good luck on your journey of rebuilding and becoming. Thank you for listening, and thank you for choosing to invest in yourself today.